So I want you to turn your Bibles tonight to 2 Samuel, and 2 Samuel chapter 19 is where we are at. So welcome back to our midweek Bible study of the United Kingdom, and that has been our overall title study for a long time now of Saul and David and eventually Solomon. However, things have seemed anything but united during the last several lessons. And so from chapter 13 to chapter 20, I've added a little kind of a subtitle in my own personal notes, Kingdom Turmoil. And that's all that has been happening since Absalom entered the storyline. But now Absalom has been disposed by Joab in chapter 18. And so we say, oh, does that mean everything is good again and everything's going to go right back to normal? Absolutely not. When there's a revolt, it takes some time to get things running in unison again. And David, who had been passive, immediately begins to work on these issues and in this chapter. So before we start this chapter, I think it's important that we do a little bit of a information review for clarification and understanding. I know that some of you don't need this and you're going to catch everything immediately, but there are some things that happen here that I kind of find confusing, and I just need to kind of sort them out in my head as I go through the chapter. And I'm going to try to go through that with you as well. Before we begin our Wednesday evening Bible study of the United Kingdom, we studied the divided kingdom. I know that was backwards, and we should have started here and then finished there, but we didn't. And we were going to try to bring some sense to the 19 kings of the northern kingdom and the 19 kings of the southern kingdom while Israel was divided. And just to bring some sense there, Judah in the south, to remind you, consisted of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. That was the southern kingdom. There were 10 tribes, the rest of the tribes, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. And on several occasions, while we're studying the United Kingdom, there are traces of the fact that a division between Judah and Israel is coming. And this chapter is certainly one of those places where we can see that division. Remember, David is from the tribe of Judah, and originally set up his kingdom at Hebron before he ever moved to Jerusalem. And then when Absalom announced himself king, he also set up at Hebron, and where David had originally been. Absalom, David's son, also from the tribe of Judah, had evidently amassed quite a following of Judahites in order for that to have even been successful and to be able to do that. And Ahithophel, his main counselor, who's now out of the picture, he was from there as well. And so to accomplish his goal, a lot of the people from Judah, David's own tribe, are now following his son Absalom. So it's important to remember that as we move into this chapter. Also remember that at the moment, it is a united kingdom, although sometimes it doesn't seem like it. And all of it is called Israel. And when it refers to Israel, it's referring to both Judah and Israel because it's not yet divided. If you go way back with us to the divided kingdom, you'll remember that there were times as you read through that it would use the word Israel when it was referring to the southern kingdom. And so it can be very confusing if you're not kind of watching that. But now Absalom is dead, and the question is, what is Judah, the tribe of Judah, going to do? Who are they going to follow? And what will Israel do in the north? And will the kingdom remain united? And the war has been fought. The battle has been won. The antagonizer has been eliminated. But that doesn't solve all the conflicts that are going on. And we're really going to see that in chapter 19 and chapter 20. I'm going to divide tonight's chapter into two parts for those who are note takers. And the first part is going to be kingdom strife. And just where I don't throw you off, we're going to start at the first part of the chapter. I'm going to jump to the end of the chapter. And then in the second point, we're going to come in and take the middle of the chapter. Hope that's clear as mud as it is in my mind. And but I think you'll see as we go. And so number one is kingdom strife. And we're going to start in verse number 9 of chapter 19. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, that'll include all 12 tribes, saying, and this is what they say then, the king saved us out of the hand of our enemies. He delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the land for Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why speak you not a word of bringing the king back? And so this statement, when we start verse number 9, initially includes all the tribes of the north and south. The battle's been fought. The victory's been won by David. David's still not at Jerusalem. He has fled to Mahanaim, and he is out of across the Jordan River. What's going to happen now to the kingdom? And so they're asking this question of what we're going to do, and they're facing this dilemma. And dilemmas often turn to strife and bickering. And because people can't agree on what needs to happen and what should happen. And there is some reasoning that takes place here as you look at verse 9 and 10, and as they consider David. He is the king that delivered them from their enemies, including the Philistines. And the Philistines had been their enemy for ages, and David has given them rest round about. But then David fled. He took off, and Absalom came in. And notice the words, whom we anointed. The only people that anointed Absalom were the Judites at Hebron. And so now we were talking about all of the tribes of Israel, and suddenly now it's just talking about Judah, and that's part of where this was confusing. And they're saying, the Judites, should we bring back King David and make him our king? And David doesn't hesitate. He is proactive here, so they're talking about what they should do. And David moves, beginning in verse 11. And King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? You are my brethren, you are my bones and my flesh, wherefore then are you the last to bring back the king? And say ye to Amasa, art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. And so he delivers this message through the priest. He reminds them of their family connection. We're brothers. I'm from Judah as well. He reassures them by appointing Amasa captain in place of the insubordinate Joab. Amasa, you'll remember, is the one who was the captain of Absalom's army. And so he's immediately saying, hey, you come back, you're going to be captain over everything. And so there are no hard feelings. No one needs to fear retribution from the king. And he's basically says, why haven't you already done this? The rest of Israel, those other 10 tribes, they're already on board. And David's message here, his little speech in verse 11 through 13, sent through Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, where you want people to be able to follow the spiritual leading. But this message is remarkably successful. And verse 14 says, he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man. That doesn't happen very often. So they sent this word unto the king, return thou and all thy servants. And so they said, come back to Jerusalem. David obtains solidarity with all of Judah. In verse 15, so the king returned, came to Jordan, that's the river, and Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king. So they're coming from two different directions to help conduct the king over Jordan. And so David had to have this assurance from Judah. I mean, that's where the rebellion began. And so now he's got them all back on board with him. Without that, he really wouldn't have been able to return. And the rebellion erupted there. Ahithophel was from there. Some of the people that are there might have still been torn a little bit in their alliance and their allegiance. And others might have felt guilty, because they departed and, wow, what's the king going to think of us now? They might have been afraid of the king and feared what his reaction to them would have been. And this appeal is exactly what was needed to unite all of Judah as one heart. And so then we say, well, does that mean all is well? Well, not really. And we'll come back and pick up again in verse number 16 in a few moments, but we're going to drop all the way down to verse number 40. And I want you to notice the last half of that verse. And when the people conduct the king over and they're coming back to Jerusalem, it says half of the people of Israel. And we'll come back to that, but it shows us that there's, some problems still. All is not harmonious. And we're going to read these last verses together, starting verse 41. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king. So what I want you to think about again is this division between Judah. You have Judah and you have Benjamin and you have all the men of Israel. And when it says all the men of Israel, it's now talking about the 10 tribes of the east. And they say to the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away and have brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over Jordan? And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is near of kin to us. He's from our tribe. Wherefore then be angry for this matter. Have we eaten at all of the king's cost? Or has he given us any gift? We're not taking anything from the king. He's not giving us some kind of favor. And then in verse number 43, and the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king. And we have also more right in David than you. He may be from your tribe, but there's 10 of us. There's only one of you. Why do you despise us? Why did you leave us out? We should have all been a part of this. That our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king. We were the ones that originally said we're ready to bring him back. And then notice this. The words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. And I just want to give a lesson here as we begin to see. As I mentioned, you can already see that, yes, someday there's going to be a divided kingdom, right? Judah and Benjamin in the south and the 10 tribes in the north, it's going to happen. But the purpose of this, it says they're arguing back and forth. There's strife that's going on. And Israel says something, and then Judah says something, and they are going to say it fiercer than Israel did. It just kind of escalates. I know you've seen this happen. Maybe you've seen it happen in your house before. One person says something that hurts someone else, and that person says something that hurts that person, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it just continues to escalate. And there's a lesson that we all need to learn. And remember, the devil's purpose of hurt is to hurt. And so my natural reaction and your natural reaction, if someone says something that hurts us, our natural response is to say something that hurts them back. And, if somebody pushes me, the natural response is to maybe push them back. But normally what's going to happen, especially when we're little kids, we see this reality. You push me a little bit, what am I going to do? I'm going to push you a little bit harder. And it just keeps escalating and escalating. And you push me, I shove you, you say harsh words, I say harsher words. So many families this happens between husbands and wives, and harsh words are said, harsher words are said, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And the devil is serving his purpose. The purpose of hurt is to hurt. The devil wants to divide and conquer and destroy. And here's the thing, he uses the same tactic in nations, in churches, and in families. And it's good for us to recognize that and realize that. And a good example of that, and it's what I want to leave in the past now, the coronavirus 2020, right? And I'd like to think it never happened. But I still talk to pastors all over the United States about all of the things that happened in their churches as a result, and the inner fighting and the bickering, and this person, well, I think we should do this, and I think we should do this, and we should do this, and everybody had a difference of opinion, and people got mad at each other. Should we mask? Should we not mask? Should we vaccinate? Should we not vaccinate? And suddenly there's this inner turmoil that happens as a result of that, and sometimes bickering and strife eventually leads to division. And that's going to happen. I mean, we see it now in this chapter, and I know it's kind of a small thing here. It hadn't happened yet. David's going to unite the kingdom again, but it continues to progress until eventually there is a divided kingdom after Solomon. And we sometimes blame Solomon, but it started way before Solomon was on the scene. And we can see it in these little instances throughout the Old Testament, and the impression is clear here. It seems as if political life in our world is full of nothing but quarrels, right? Do you dread all of the election chaos that's coming, that maybe already is coming? I've been getting these texts on my phone from a guy that used to be president and is no longer president but wants to be president, and I cannot get rid of them. I've tried to delete them. I've tried to report them as spam. I tried to, delete and report as junk and just block this number, block this number, block this number. He must have 5,000 numbers that he's texted me every day. And I'm like, how can I get rid of this? And there's so much tension and there's so much chaos there. And what happens is some have devotion to the king and some are in opposition to the king. And those two sides, they don't always get along. The rightful king has returned, but there's no peace in the kingdom. Animosity and envy among the subjects threaten the stability of his kingdom. And so the question is, how can kingdoms or churches or families survive petty bickering, flagrant sins, hurt feelings, stubbornness, trivial priorities, tragic apathy, all of those things? And here's the answer. Thankfully, human tendencies are often overcome by divine grace. And I'm thankful for that. Christ is building his kingdom. Christ is building his church. And if it was not so, it would have perished long ago. But God is in charge, and God is in control. The kingdom is the Lord's. We see that in the Old Testament. So is the church. It's wise for us to know that Satan is always trying to work. He's trying to divide. He's trying to hurt. He's trying to conquer. And so as Christians, we need to say, hey, I'm going to be the one that stops the hurt. I'm not going to get involved in the strife. I'm not going to get involved in those petty things. As the Bible says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. So I want to stay out of the strife and leave that to someone else. The second thing we're going to look at, not only kingdom strife, but now we're going to see kingdom servants. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pick up the journey of the king and company as they make their way back to Jerusalem. And if you'll remember, a few chapters back, there were several parties that met the king as he left Jerusalem. So when Absalom was coming, the king is fleeing away from the city of Jerusalem, down the Kidron Valley, up over the Mount of Olives, back into the wilderness. Ittai, the Philistine leader, met him. Zadok met the priest Hushai, who he leaves in the palace to give advice. Ziba comes, who was supposed to be taking care of Mephibosheth, and Shimei. All are there in this story. And some of these individuals, it's like he's going to boomerang encounter them on the way back upon his return. So he left. There's these encounters as he leaves. Now he's going to return back to the city, and there's going to be several encounters as he returns. It kind of helps us fill in the story of what happens to Shimei, Ziba, Mephibosheth after chapter 16. So we haven't heard from them in a while. It's going to pick up. If those names all mean nothing to you, don't worry. I'll explain them as we go along. So first, Shimei. Shimei is a guy that was cursing David and all the soldiers and everyone as they left the city of Jerusalem, throwing stones at them. And so they're leaving, and he's yelling curses. God got you. This is what you deserve. And he's the one that I mentioned in chapter 16, reminds me of Gollum, if that means anything to you. But the question is, what is he going to do now? And so here he comes in verse 16. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, I want you to catch that he was a Benjamite. He's a Bahurim, hasted and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. So the men of Judah are coming, and Shimei is coming. And notice in verse 17, there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him. That's a lot of people. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, who was supposed to be the one taking care of Mephibosheth, he has 15 sons, 20 servants. That's quite a few, a little contingency even with him. And they went over Jordan before the king. And so if I just fought this internal battle with Absalom, and I'm coming back to the city of Jerusalem, I know that the men of Judah have now joined me with one heart, but here are 1,000 Benjamites coming. I think my initial reaction would have been 1,000 men coming. Are we about to have another war right here? But evidently they didn't come as soldiers. They didn't come in a threatening way, because the Bible doesn't show any worry about the fact that these 1,000 men are there. And they don't arrive as soldiers. They arrive as servants of the king. And Ziba does have a good-sized contingency here of 35. So you have the 1,000 Benjamites, all the men of Judah, and 30. This is a big group of people coming to meet David. But Shimei is the focus, the guy that's been cursing David when he left town. And there went, in verse 18, a ferry boat to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. You wonder how they crossed the Jordan. It wasn't dry land this time. They had a ferry boat. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was come over Jordan. So he lands on the other side. He comes across Jordan, back towards Jerusalem, on the Jerusalem side. He falls before him, says to the king, let not my lord impute iniquity unto me, neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perversely the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. Hey, don't take anything I said to heart now, for thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I am come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. So he admits he's wrong. He does try to plead his case by saying, hey, look, I'm the first guy to return to you as king and bow before you. I brought all these men. Look, I brought 1,000 guys to follow you as well. And I'm back on the David bandwagon and pleading mercy and forgiveness. And I don't think there's any reason for us to believe for a second that he has made any kind of a change of heart. And he's just saving his skin. His response is not out of love, but out of policy and personal advantage. You know, he's just tried to look out for number one. In verse 21, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, this is Joab's brother, said, shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he's cursed the Lord's anointed? I mean, he's there with the sword. I'll take care of this guy right now. If you let me, you didn't let me take care of him on the way over. I'm glad to do the same thing for you now. By the way, the Torah doesn't specifically mandate such a penalty. And David doesn't seem to want to do that either. Verse 22 and 23, David said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be adversaries to me? We're not trying to stir up any more problems. Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel? I really like the last part of that phrase. David's response is, I know who I am. I know I'm the king. I've been the anointed king. I am the anointed king. It's a day of celebration. No one else needs to die on this day. And chopping off Shimei's head at this point probably wouldn't have been advantageous with all the turmoil that's going on. And here he comes with all these people, and you kill him. It certainly could have caused greater division, and division is not what's needed in the kingdom. The kingdom needs to be united. So Shimei is there, and David lets him slide, all right, for now. And the next person is Mephibosheth. And boy, this is an interesting one. Mephibosheth, and let's just read verse 24 through 30 together. Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down, he's really the grandson of Saul, came down to meet the king, and had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came again in peace. And it came to pass, when he was come to Jerusalem to meet the king said unto him, wherefore wentest thou not with me, Mephibosheth? He answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me, talking about Ziba from verse 17. He deceived me, for thy servant said, I'll saddle me an ass that I may ride therein and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. He is going to get my donkey. But he did never come back. He has slandered thy servant unto my lord the king. But my lord the king is an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thy eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet did thou not set thy servant among them that did eat at thy own table. Right, therefore have I yet to cry any more unto the king. And the king said unto him, Why speakest thou any more of the matter? I have said, Thou and Ziba divide the land. And Mephibosheth said unto the king, Yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace unto his own house. So let's go over this for a moment. And again, you need to remember the story. Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son, which Jonathan was David's great friend, Saul's son Jonathan. This Mephibosheth, when the news comes that Saul and Jonathan are killed in battle, the nurse fleeing with Mephibosheth is in a hurry, and she drops Mephibosheth, and he becomes lame on both of his feet. He goes to the land of Lodabar, and he's in hiding in Lodabar because normally when new kings come to the throne, anybody that's a part of the previous lineage that could be a threat to the throne. But David says, oh, this guy was Jonathan, he was my friend. I promised him that I would take care of his family. And so he finds Mephibosheth, he brings him to his house, he puts him at his own table, and he treats him like a son, and he makes Ziba his servant. And so Ziba is his servant there. It's really a beautiful story of grace, a beautiful story of us being able to come before our King, even though we're crippled by our sin, and coming to the King of Kings table. It's a beautiful thing. But when David had to flee the city, Mephibosheth is nowhere to be seen. Ziba, the guy who David said, you take care of him and take care of all of his fields, take care of his family, you guys be a servant to him. All of that was Saul's is his now. Ziba is a little bit put out with that, and he doesn't bring Mephibosheth before the king. He tells the king, oh, he's there because he's glad Absalom is going to be king, and he's hoping that he's going to be restored to a position in the kingdom, which doesn't even make sense because he has to have the house of Saul. Absalom doesn't care about the house of Saul. But anyways, in his haste to flee, David is fine. I'll give you everything that was Mephibosheth's. So he comes back, and here's Mephibosheth. Where have you been? Why were you not there? I've taken care of you. I was there for you. Where were you at? And the last we've heard of him was in chapter 16, verse 1 through 4, when Ziba alleged that he was not faithful. And now Mephibosheth gets to speak for himself in answer to the king's question. Where were you at? And he gives him, basically, there's two things that you'll see. One is a sign, and the sign is he's been in mourning. He hasn't shaved. He hasn't taken care of himself. It shows where his heart had been. He had let himself go, showing his grief publicly. Now, that's a risky move while Absalom is in town. He's showing that he's loyal to David even while Absalom was there. And now David comes back and he sees that he's been in mourning all this time. So immediately that should start clicking with David something about this story. And then he tells him the story. Ziba tricked me. He deceived you. And I was lame. He was supposed to go get the donkey where I could come with you. And he never came back. And Ziba tricked him and lied to the king. And he basically says to the king, Mephibosheth does, you've been so good to me. I'm not even going to appeal to you anymore. Do whatever you want. And I'm just thankful that the rightful king has safely returned to town, and that was my goal. He was lame, he was limited, but he was loyal. So David's decision here. I have to admit that David's decision bothers me somewhat. David says, okay, you guys split the land now. I was like, wow, is that really fair? This guy lied to him. Is it fair? It's somewhat understandable because Ziba had come with all the Benjamites. There's 1,000 of those Benjamites. There's 35 of Ziba's servants and sons together. David is trying to unite a kingdom, so I can kind of understand all that. But his decision also seems unjust. Because Ziba is a greedy, self-indulging liar, but he was also helpful to the king and the kingdom. When David fled, he brought him provisions. So what do you do with that? So David reverses his decision partially and reverses his decision halfway. Okay, now you two guys are just going to split all that land and everything else. And in doing so, David probably maintained loyalty from both parties. And David needed all the support he could get right now, just to try to justify this. But here's my thoughts. So with Shimei, the guy who cursed David leaving town and bowed before him coming back, David acted with clemency. Okay, I'm just going to let you off. With Mephibosheth, David acted with expediency. Okay, this is just divide it in half. With Ziba, David responded with pragmatism, because this really works out best for me right now. I'm not for sure that justice prevailed with any of the three. But the kingdom was being restored, and everyone's coming back loyal to the king. And so it's working the way that David needed. There's another person here in verse 31 through 40, and this is Barzillai, the Gileadite. He came down from Rajalim and went over Jordan with the king to conduct him over Jordan. Now Barzillai was a very aged man, even 80 years old. He provided the king of sustenance while he lay at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come now with me, and I'll feed thee with me at Jerusalem." And Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I to live, that I should go up with the king unto Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old, and can I discern between good and evil? Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men and singing women? Wherefore then should thy servant be yet a burden unto my lord the king? Thy servant will go a little way over Jordan with the king, and why should the king recompense it with me such a reward? Let thy servant, I pray thee, turn back again, that I may die in my own city, and be buried my grave of my father and my mother. But behold, thy servant Kimham, let him go over with my lord the king, and do to him what shall seem good to thee." And the king answered, "Kimham shall go over with me, and I'll do to him that which shall seem good unto thee, and whatsoever thou shalt require me, that will I do for thee." And all the people went over Jordan, and the king was come over. The king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned into his own place. Now, Barzillai is one of the men from chapter 17, verse 27, that had supplied David and his men with resources when they fled and went to Mahanaim. Of all the servants we've now mentioned in this chapter, he appears to be the only one who isn't looking for something in return, somewhat. And, what's in it for me? Hey, I'll be there for you, Shimei, as long as it's, it's good for my neck, right? And but this is the mark of a true friend. What can I do for you? I'll do anything for you. I don't want anything. You don't have to do anything for me. And he's considered elderly. 80 then was considered elderly. I know that now 80 is the new 60. I get it. And but at that point, he was considered elderly. He was wealthy. He had helped sustain the king and Mahanaim. And David expresses his gratitude by inviting him to live at court like royalty for the rest of his life. But he respectfully declines. Hey, I'm good. I don't need anything. And he gives him several reasons. My age, I'm 80 years old. Why am I going to move now? I can't taste good food anymore. And my hearing's not so good. I can't even hear the singers that come in the court. What good's it going to do to live in the royal court? And so I'd just be a burden to you. Let me return home and live out the rest of my days and, be buried with my family. And here's the thing about Barzillai. He is content where he is with what he has. Just want you to know that is a good way to be. It's a good way to live. He's 80 years old, and when he's 80 years old, think about this, he performed his most important service for the kingdom of God at 80. That's pretty cool. He's been faithful to the king. So besides that, what else matters? What else does he need? I mean, what could one want beyond that? Godliness with contentment is great gain. It's good for all of us to have. And a man like that knows how to live in freedom. Let me just go back home and enjoy my life. And then there's this guy, Kimham. Not going to talk a lot about him. Don't know much about him. Probably a relative, even though it says servant of Barzillai. Jeremiah 41:17 is indication that David fulfilled his word and promise because there is a city near Bethlehem that's named after him. And so he's like given this estate in Judah near Bethlehem, just a couple of miles from Jerusalem. But what I want you to see is the last part of verse number 40. Everybody comes back with a king, all the Judites, all the Benjamites, half of the people of Israel. That's an indication of what's going to come in chapter 20. I don't have anything ready for chapter 20. You don't have to worry about me jumping right into that tonight. But I do have the title. It will be Post-Revolt Rebellions. And we had tonight's lesson, but next week's going to kind of continue right on, and we're going to see very rebellious people within the kingdom. And by the way, it's going to be several weeks before we get there. My family is leaving next Wednesday on vacation. Just want to let you know that. And there will be people here on Wednesday night, hopefully with you. And you will all come as well. A year ago, for our anniversary, for our 20th anniversary, the church was so gracious and gave us an Alaskan cruise or funds toward that. And that's what we're going to be doing. So next Wednesday, we're going to be flying out, and we'll be gone for a couple of weeks. And appreciate your prayers while we are away. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm at least 1 minute past. You are dismissed unless you're in the choir.